Big welcome to everybody coming in this afternoon to talk once again about our one of our favorite topics that's been shaking things up in the world of voice these days is stir shaking, of course. So one of the questions we get a lot is around this whole idea of some of the nuances of how the technology is being rolled out, especially something called attestation. So of course we bring in our good friend here, Michael Tyndall, our co-founder, who knows pretty much more than just about anybody else about sort of shaking and attestation. So, Mike, welcome in today.
Thanks, Tim. No pressure. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's evolving. Yeah, we're gonna stay on top of it. So, with that, I just want to say again, thanks. This is our second of three webinars around this topic. We've got another one coming up on the 15th after we all have a nice Labor Day, I hope, and we'll get back and talk more about phase two, which is now that the technology is rolled out, we understand attestation, we know what's going on with our calls, what's going to be coming up in the future weeks and months ahead, as best as we can tell, because we know that it's a bit of a moving target. So the best way to register for that is just like you probably did for this one. Go over to thinQ.com/blog. You'll see a post there. You're going to find two things there. You're going to find information about the next webinar where you can click register. Please do that. And you'll also see video recordings of both this webinar and the previous one. So you can get all caught up there as well. There's also a really good webinar we did recently with our friends from Teli about 10DLC brand and campaign registration and some of the other things going on with text messaging. So really encourage you guys to check out our blog. We're publishing something new every week, and there's lots of good information coming out there. So love for you to do that. But with that, let's go ahead and Mike, we'll start with a quick refresher. Whenever we hear the word stir shaking, it's usually followed up with caller ID spoofing and or robocalls. And that's what's been getting the headlines, right or wrong. So we know that there are lots and lots of robocalls, illegal robocalls, as well as, standard robocalls going on every year. In fact, it looks like we're on track for over 51 billion robocalls this year, according to Fortune. And really what Stir Shaken is here to help us with is, combating those illegal calls. And specifically, and Mike, we talked about this last time around, it's about eliminating caller ID spoofing. Because with Stir Shaken for the first time, the idea is we'll be able to identify the source of those calls, reduce, again, frequency and impact, improve accuracy, because I don't know about you, but I don't trust this thing at all. Like when this thing goes off, if it's a text message, I think I kind of trust it. But if it's a call, I make sure that anything that isn't in my personal, address list file or whatever, my personal phone book, it goes right to voicemail anymore because I feel like I just can't trust what's coming on that call. And again, this last item, we showed an example of what Verizon was doing is, they're able to give us helpful suggestions about when to answer, which is putting a little check mark next to verified numbers, which isn't 100% accurate yet, right, Mike? They've just started.
Yeah, you're starting to see that across a lot of different networks. Also, I don't really trust the text messages the way you do either. I got a text the other day from a Denver number saying I'd messed something up on my Amazon account and please click here and provide all of my information, which I did, and there was nothing wrong. So hopefully that works out. But
you're right.
Yeah, so you're seeing that. The other cool thing, a lot of specifically referencing mobile providers. I'm looking at mine. I've got T-Mobile. They launched something unbeknownst to me. I was actually working with a customer on a Verizon issue, and they were walking me through the filtering process that Verizon has for them. And I just happened to look, and T-Mobile's now got something called Scam Shield, which I downloaded, and it gives me different levers and controls to do things about the calls coming in. So you're starting to see the empowerment of, the end user, being able to make their own choices about what comes through, what goes to voicemail, what gets blocked.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Which is why we're talking today, because these attestation levels really do seem to play a part on inside the code, right? Inside the call code that might be able to trigger some of those things that we're seeing, right? Mm-hmm. So just to, again, a really quick summary about Stir Shaken. These are the long-winded way of explaining what Stir and Shaken are. Again, you'll notice we're talking about secure identity here and signature-based handling of asserted information, right? So that's one reason we're using this word attestation as part of this process. So, again, by the way, I think Mike and I both agree that, hats off, the FCC had to do something about this. This is, their first sort of iteration of it. They've been working on it for quite a long time. It's definitely not perfect, but, hats off for the effort. And, this is a really good, first step of them taking this into their hands. But with that, Michael, we can go ahead and transition here to talk about this is, how is StirShaken really going to work to solve this problem is the idea that, calls are going to be signed, right, as legitimate by the originating carriers and validated by other carriers, including us, before they actually reach customers. So, it's all about validating this handoff and, the caller ID information so that, the person who gets the call again, when they see what shows up on this phone, that it will actually be, readily identifiable that it's more correct. I can't tell you how many sales calls I get and people promise that they're right here in Raleigh. And I know for a fact they're not in Raleigh. It's just being stamped on there. So the idea is this will hopefully, again, restore trust and give us data that we can get behind. So with that, let's go ahead and work through. So this leads us to this idea of attestation. So Mike, could you walk us through, what is it and how is it supposed to work?
Yeah. So presently there are 3 levels of attestation, as we discussed in previous webinars and I think on the podcast. This protocol or this framework certainly has room for expansion, D, E, F, that kind of thing. But right now we have 3, C being the lowest attested variable there. So basically, if you're not familiar with it, C is a gateway level attestation that just says the call came through my network. I don't have a relationship with the customer or with the number that's being used, but it made it through my checkpoint, if you will. Mm-hmm. So these would be things like traditional wholesale gateways, international gateways for calls from around the world coming into the US and Canada. That would be examples of a C level.
Okay.
And then B, which presently is our default with our clients, because we're the provider. We have a direct relationship with the customer. We know who they are. We have relationships, that kind of thing. They may not be using our numbers in every single case, but that relationship exists should there be an issue, and should subpoenas come to us from various entities. They come from everywhere: Homeland, FBI, sometimes even at like a state level, if there's a state level scam or something like that going on. But it lets whoever's investigating that or authenticating that know that we at least know who the customer is. So they should probably come talk to us. Mm-hmm. And then A takes that a step further, that says, I also, in addition to all of those things, I can also attest that this is their number. They're allowed to use it. They acquired it from us, or, in the future, I expect there will be some sort of additional vetting process for OffNet. We're still in the process of designing that, because the next phase of our deployment is this A-level attestation, when we start pulling in the inventory that's on thinQ's network and coming from an authorized trunk on a customer account with that number. We'll be able to do the A. So that's the next step. I fully expect into next year there will be something similar to what you have to do when you port, like some sort of, for an OffNet number. So like a bill copy, an LOA proving that it's an OffNet number that you can use. And then, I would expect to start seeing some more, expansion for that A-level attestation. But there has to be a verification process in place. And right now, the only technical way that we have to do that is if it's on the network. So that's where we'll be starting. We'll absolutely be looking at the future of A-level as it moves forward, if we can put those types of validation processes in place and it checks all the boxes to attest that that customer can use the number, we're absolutely looking at that too.
Gotcha. Yeah, now that we know what it is, Mike, and as you mentioned, we're signing our calls with B right now, or B attestation with a goal of A down the road. I think one of the big takeaways is this currently that's happening on some calls, not all calls, and nothing's being blocked today, as of this moment.
Yeah, I mean, so the Think network's not going to do any of the blocking. There could be a vendor downstream that could be looking at attestations or doing, a verification on the certificate and decide they don't want it for whatever reason. That's not really up to us.
Mm-hmm.
But so far, we're not seeing that level of enforcement yet. I think it's going to be there very soon. It's probably starting this year. I know September was a big month, which we're about to head into specifically for robocall mitigation plan filing and those kinds of things. So I think you'll start to see that be, cracked down on first if you're not in that database and you haven't published your plan and those kinds of things. And I think that, it's going to be interesting to see what happens on different networks for the different paths. But so far, the most things that we're seeing are relative to how a call is actually delivered, whether it says scam likely or something like that based on attestation levels.
Right. And Mike, we already got a question in here from Brett. He's asking if one of our customers performs outbound, I guess, trust Think to sign their outbound calls, what impact would that have to the level of attestation that Think assigns to the call? I guess is what he's asking.
So if one of his customers comes through his account,
right,
using a number that's, I guess it could be any number, right? Right. It's not going to affect the attestation level. You're our customer of record, so it will still be flagged on the networks that have that little check mark next to it. If you go into the portal, you'll see the ones that are stir shaking capable. If it goes through one of those, it'll still have the B and it'll be attested to your account. Like I said earlier, if there's ever a request for more information or some authority comes, your account's the one that we point them towards.
Right. And I think, Mike, too, we also covered that if one of our customers, there are some of our customers that are signing their own calls, so we allow that to pass through, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was baked in there from day one. We right. wanted, any existing signatures to be passed because that work's already been done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing that this just started exactly a month ago, right? It was right on the 1st of August and we're already a month in. So good question, Brett. Let me know if that didn't answer your question. Yeah, exactly. He said, yes, that's what I was asking. If we pass the signature, will it impact the attestation level? So yeah, perfect. Yeah, everybody use that chat box if you do have questions as we go. We're happy to answer them. So we're going to cover a lot more of this coming up, but Mike, we are already getting questions about what the future looks like. So, you already talked about how we're starting with a B, there's a road to an A. We're seeing those verification marks inside of the thinQ platform. You can actually see the carriers that are applying the stir shaken protocols to calls. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of other things coming up about, you already mentioned that there could be potentially room for even a, D or an E, attestation level potentially down the road. And lots of other things coming, including, I can't believe we put it on here, but maybe fines, who knows? The enforcement piece is still a mystery.
Well, that's historically their big stick, right? If you look across recent history at activities they've tried to curb, it's always like a minimum of like a $10,000 or $15,000 fine, that kind of thing. And then you get the much, much higher profile cases that make the news that are millions of dollars. I'm assuming that's just folks that were warned and right. didn't do anything. So yeah, we're already seeing the validation check marks. We talked about that a little bit. Covered call blocking a little bit, not seeing that in large tranches across calls yet. More levels could be coming. I think, like I said, that's They designed it, I think, on purpose to be extensible. And then the big deadline this month is the registration of robocall mitigation plans with the FCC. And there are various levels up to partial stir shaking implementation, full stir shaking implementation, or some other means that or process that people design and document and say we're not doing any of that, but here's what we are doing. Um,
Right.
that's coming up this month.
And Mike, I think we also talked the last time around too that the bigger providers have already asked for multi-year extensions on this because there are hardware portions of their network that aren't
Well,
aren't
yeah, I mean,
accessible
you
yet.
think about the mix of what they probably have to work with just through sheer consolidation, M&A, you know, uh, just antiquated things that are existing in the network. So that's a big job. It is, and
Right.
that's why they've
Right.
asked for that.
Yeah. Mike, Bill is asking, he says, I don't always receive the identity header when routing through the blue checkmark routes. I think we are noticing that sometimes well, even through like Verizon, like even my wife's phone number doesn't always have a check mark next to it. Like it's not 100%, right?
Um, I would be surprised if the header itself made it through to the far end at all, simply because whenever the receiving carrier grabs that call, they're going to ideally validate it, which case they don't need that anymore. They're going to stick a first stat element within the P asserted or whichever header's delivering the caller ID. And a lot of times I've seen they'll even include, but not always, sometimes include the attestation level within that. But if they've done the validation, they don't need the header anymore. That's most of the reason you don't see it come. If it does come through, I would expect that that's probably a network that's not doing validation yet. They're not looking at it. They're
Hmm.
just sending it.
Interesting. Well, it's a good question, Bill. Appreciate
Mm-hmm.
that. Um, yeah, so I think with that, look at that. We promised a 20-ish minute webinar. We're at minute 17, so we're on time again, Mike. I appreciate that. So definitely encourage everybody to join us after the holiday. Hope everybody has a wonderful holiday plan for this weekend. But we're going to talk about phase two. So that's where we're going to go a little deeper into, what we know is going to happen in the short term, but then potential long-term changes, impacts, ideas of what may come, in the coming weeks and months ahead. And we're going to keep all of you up to date with the new information as we receive it, and we'll be sharing that with you. So I'm looking forward to going a little deeper into the crystal ball on stir shaking, as
Yeah.
we go forward.
And as we do subsequent updates, we will start to get tighter resolution for everyone interested on the A level and beyond. So you'll have that to look forward to. We're certainly looking forward to it, and excited to get there and provide that level of service.
Excellent. Let me see. I think we might have got. Do we get another question? Let's see. Robert's saying, think does termination outgoing calls for our VoIP phone systems with 90 separate outgoing caller ID numbers. These numbers are not entered into the robocall mitigation database. Not sure what he's asking there exactly. So he has 90 phone numbers, and how do those numbers get entered into the robocall mitigation database?
It's not a number registration database. It's a plan database that says this is the company or entity, this is the plan, this is what we're saying we're doing. It's almost like an affirmation kind of thing. I attest that I'm doing these things. It'd be interesting if they actually take it that far to register numbers. They could. I mean, look at 10DLC on SMS.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense now. Yeah, that's right. The robocall mitigation database was part of what we had to file, our plan for how we're handling it. That's right. And that has been filed and is live at the FCC, has been since before the deadline. Brett's asking for PSTN, how does PSTN handle stir shaken as it does not talk to SIP? I think the answer is it doesn't. Yeah,
that's the big problem.
Right.
Last July, my gosh, I was on so many calls with various C-level technology people, VP levels within almost almost every single logo that you see in the portal. And it was really interesting. Some of these calls were like 3 hours long, and we're debating this back and forth. And, a lot of really, really smart, experienced legacy telecom and current telecom engineers on the call. And that was one of the big discussions, is that they, they were kind of getting into the weeds about the technicality of how precise it can be, because the argument was, well, at that time it was like 60% of this, is PSTN or something like that. And
Right.
how's that going to work? It's not going to work. And just listening to them go back and forth was really interesting. So I think that, yeah, that's a hole. And that's part of the reason I think they've asked for extensions, to try to figure out what to do. You have to keep in mind, back before voice over IP, you could only get a number on an actual wireline, or like a PRI or a CAST-1 kind of thing. So it had to be going in and out of a trunk group that they had physically plugged into your facility, right? They didn't have to worry about not, people using numbers they weren't supposed to. Now we can put whatever we want in the header, and this issue's cropped up over the last 10, 15 years. So yeah, they'll have to, I imagine they're going to have some sort of proxy to handle that, would be my guess.
Right.
But that's probably why they've asked for these extensions, to implement those sort of, VoIP to PSTN interfaces that can do this.
Right. Hey, Robert, just wanted to follow up. You had a second question after the one we talked about, the robocall mitigation database. It's important to understand. So, think teli, we've registered with that database. So yes, your calls will complete across our network after September 28th. September 28th is technically the deadline when folks like us had to file into the mitigation database. And right, Mike, we're already ahead of that
Yeah,
deadline.
that's one of those things where it's like filing your taxes.
Right.
You have to do it by April 15th in most years. This year was different. But
Right.
if you don't do it, it's not like the IRS shows up on the 16th,
Right.
They're going to fine you, right? You'll have some penalties and interest and stuff like that. But I think that's like the starting gate that says, all right, we can start going after people that aren't in here. So
Yep. Hey, so Mike, we got this is an interesting question, because it's one I had at the beginning too. Was, who actually needs to register with that mitigation database? And I think the answer is people like us, right?
it's really, it's really
Yeah.
operators like us. It's not in
Right.
customers.
That's right.
It's folks that are taking calls from large swaths of sources. I'm going to say sources because, there's lots of different business models in this industry, but, anyone who's kind of a transit point, or a supplier are the ones that have to do that, and customers don't do this.
Right. So end customers don't. He's saying, so if people like us, for instance, Mike, because we have registered with the database, there's really nothing else we need to be doing right now besides following through on the plan that we filed and making sure that we're putting the technology in place, right? And following our plan.
Yeah, it's an
Right.
accountability measure. It's,
Yeah.
if for some reason, if this ever happened and someone from the FCC or some other entity came and said, well, this is what you said your plan was, why didn't you do this thing? Or we asked for this and you didn't follow. This is what you said. We asked
Right.
you to tell us what you were going to do. This is
Yep.
what you told us you were going to do.
Yep.
Right. It's like a contract.
Yeah. So, and I think final question here looks like it's again from Robert. It's, and again, to be perfectly clear, think teli, we have registered with the mitigation database. September 28th is technically the deadline for when that needed to be filed. It's already filed. We're following through on our plan. So calls are completing today. They'll complete on the 28th, and they'll complete into the future. So you don't have to worry about your calls not being completed. They'll be signed with that B attestation level, and we'll work through how we're going to, be able to sign things with an A. Your phone number might have to be, registered with us. We might have to own the, have the number on our network. We'll see where that goes, but we don't have a clear answer for that today. But you don't have to worry about any of your traffic, right, Mike? It's
Right.
gonna
That's
gonna
right.
continue. Good.
Yep.
I love that you asked it 3 times. I love it. We just want to make sure we're super clear on what's going to happen and not happen. I absolutely appreciate that, because I know people are. It's a little confusing. Mark is asking, what about our resellers and their end users? How does this impact them?
Customers, resellers.
Um, Well, he said, what about, I guess, our resellers and their end users? He's asking about.
Yeah, I mean, if one of our customers happens to be a VoIP provider,
Mhm.
they're going to have to register their own mitigation plan. If they want to, they could go through the process of getting their own certificate and signing their calls. They don't have to because they're a customer of ours, but they
Right.
should file a plan at a minimum if they're a provider of any kind like that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. No problem, Robert. Let's see. I love it.
And
Every time, Mike, by the way, somebody makes a great comment about your background in your Apple II GS. So way to go there.
thanks.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you were going to ask, you were going to say something else, Mike. I cut you off. What were you going to say? Or
Oh,
no?
I was going to say, and it's not like at least now, it's not a really rigid framework. If you go look through the database, I mean, you can look and read everybody's plans. It's not like a templated format. It's, you know,
Yeah. I
they
mean, you're
ask for like
certainly
a point of contact, the level
right.
of stir shaking you've implemented. If at
Yep.
all, a lot of them in there say we're not doing it. We're doing it some other way, and we're keeping our own database of known offending robocall numbers, and we're doing a blacklist and all those things. You see that stuff in there too.
Yep.
It's really just you're making yourself known and what your plan is.
Yeah, you're certainly everybody's welcome to go over there. Our plan is there. Our data is publicly available as well. Well, great. Mike, loved all the questions at the end, guys. That makes it interactive. We really appreciate that. So
Yeah.
again, highly encourage you if you have any questions about what's coming, register for that for the next webinar on the 15th. You'll be seeing invites coming to you via email along with the recording of this presentation. You can reply to that with questions. I'll make sure they get to Mike, and we'll start building out that in the next couple of weeks. And I hope everybody has a great Labor Day planned. I know I can certainly use a break. I'm sure everybody else can as well. Stay safe out there. Stay healthy, and appreciate your time today, everybody. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah. Thank you.